know that particularly being an American, although, I mean, granted, it can happen in any country, but assimilation has become this really highly politicized and often dirty word. And for me, I don't look at it that way. I think that it is really important to assimilate. And it's a really interesting thing because for most people who, let's say if you're like fully immigrating to a country, so you're not just studying abroad, you're fully immigrating. Most people that are immigrating to a country, they want to go to that country for a reason. So they are willing to assimilate. So I don't really buy this sort of notion of, assimilation is this horrible, xenophobic, whatever type of thing. I don't buy into that. I do think that it is important to respect different cultures. And I think that, for example, with everything on this channel, you will learn that I go back to London for everything because it is my most favorite place in the world. But I would use London as a great example of that. I know that a lot of Americans would probably use New York as an example of this, but I often look at New York as a little bit different because New York, again, is still made up my majority of Americans, whereas with London, you literally have a microcosm of every different country there, every different type of language. There's so much going on, and people are respectful of people's different cultures. That is definitely celebrated. But overall, you are expected to assimilate into English culture. And most of the people that come there, they want to be there because they love the UK. They love what the UK stands for. They love being there. And I think that's true in most countries where people come to immigrate. And so I would just want to point that out, that assimilation to me is not a dirty word, and particularly in the context of study abroad. It's not going to be something that it's going to sort of take over your entire life, but I do think that it is important. Now, just because you study abroad, it doesn't mean that you don't love where you're from. I think that that's like another thing too. It could just be like a very American thing, but I know that there's this entire narrative around like, oh, like, well, you traveled abroad and you lived abroad, then you must, not, you must wanted to get away from America. It's like, well, no, I mean, I have my reasons for wanting to study abroad, but they don't come more patriotic than me. So that is definitely not true. But I think that the other thing too is that you don't want to compare and contrast. So one of the things that I really had to do, because I am very, proud being American, very patriotic, is I had to sort of step back and, after sort of accepting the fact that I was in a new place and wanting to be curious about the Italian culture, about the UK culture, about the culture of even different states that I've lived in, is sort of accepting that, you're accepting where you are, but then also to sort of not doing compare and contrast too much. Say this is someone who has at this point lived all over the world in a lot of respects, in a lot of different states here in the US. So I understand what I'm talking about. And you have to be able to do that. Now, that doesn't mean that you're not going to like certain things, maybe compared to where you're from. I definitely go through that. Even myself living here in the US, living in a different state than where I was born. And sort of raised and grew up. And so, it's like this idea of you definitely have to sort of limit that and figure out what's going to work for you while you're there. It doesn't mean that everything is going to work for you. So there are some things that you are never going to accept and never going to enjoy. Stay away from those things. We all go through that. We all do that. But for the things that you feel that this is an add-on, this is a bonus that I could only experience living here, being part of this culture, I want you to embrace that. So maybe it is something really exciting. I know, for example, a lot of countries have, Carnival. That is something that a lot of countries also don't have. So for example, if you're in the UK or here in the US or in Canada, well, I don't know about Canada, but I know in the UK and in the US, we don't have that. We do have Mardi Gras, but that's very localized. But for example, in a lot of places like Italy, and I think Greece does it. I know a lot of the Caribbean cultures do it. There's probably some other places around the world that I've missed. Carnival is like this huge thing for the entire month that they do it for, and everyone feels like, they can get involved. That's just an example, but it's like, that's something that's completely different that can only happen where you are based on when you're studying abroad. Embrace that, get excited about it because it's so different from what you're doing. Don't compare it to say, oh, well, we don't do that at home, so I'm not going to do it. I think that, a lot of students also go through that, when they, let's say, come to study abroad in the US, particularly in the summertime. So for example, with 4th of July, it's like they'll come to the US and it's like, should I be excited about this? I know particularly with British students, they're like, yeah, this feels very wrong to be celebrating 4th of July, but people get into it, right? So again, that's something that you would not be experiencing anywhere else outside of the US. So wherever you're going to be going, I just definitely want you to limit yourself with the compare and contrast, and that's going to help you to ease your assimilation a bit more and be able to feel part of the culture as opposed to an outsider who is just there.